Rebecca Martinez never imagined that answering her front door on a rainy Tuesday morning would turn her entire world upside down. Standing on her porch was CPS worker Diana Hoffman, clipboard in hand, claiming she'd received reports about Rebecca's fitness as a mother. What followed would expose a web of lies, corruption, and fabricated evidence that nearly destroyed an innocent family, until body camera footage revealed the shocking truth. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The knock came at 8:47 a.m., just as Rebecca was preparing breakfast for her two children, 7-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Tyler. She'd been up since 6, packing lunches, braiding Emma's hair, and helping Tyler find his favorite dinosaur shirt. The morning routine was chaotic, but filled with laughter. Tyler giggling as he tried to feed cereal to his stuffed triceratops, Emma practicing her spelling words between bites of toast. Rebecca wiped flour from her hands before opening the door. She'd been making pancakes from scratch, something she did every Tuesday as a special treat for the kids. The woman standing before her was tall, stern-faced, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her badge gleamed against a navy blazer that looked expensive, too expensive for a government worker's salary. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Diana Hoffman from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about your children." Rebecca's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake." Hoffman stepped forward without invitation. "May I come in? We've received concerning reports about the welfare of Emma and Tyler Martinez." The living room Diana Hoffman entered contradicted every assumption she'd apparently made about this household. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, crayon drawings of rainbow families and construction paper flowers. Educational toys were neatly organized in bins along the wall. The breakfast table was set with colorful plates shaped like animals, and the scent of vanilla pancakes filled the air. Emma peeked around the corner, her school backpack already strapped on, ready for the day ahead. Tyler continued chattering at his dinosaur, completely absorbed in his imaginary world. These were clearly happy, well-adjusted children in a loving home. But Diana Hoffman had come here with a different story already written in her mind. "I need to inspect the premises," she announced, pulling out her phone and activating the body camera clipped to her jacket. Standard protocol. Rebecca followed nervously as Hoffman moved through the house with purpose. The bedrooms were clean, the children's beds made with cartoon-themed comforters. The bathroom had step stools for the kids to reach the sink, toothbrushes in colorful holders, and tear-free shampoo lined up or the tub's edge. In the kitchen, Hoffman opened the refrigerator and found it well stocked with fresh fruits, vegetables, milk, and sandwich ingredients for school lunches. The pantry held cereals, pasta, canned goods, and healthy snacks. Every cabinet showed signs of a mother who planned ahead, who cared about nutrition, who made sure her children never went hungry. "Your employment status?" Hoffman asked, making notes on her clipboard. "I work part-time at the community college, teaching adult education classes, mostly evenings when my neighbor Mrs. Patterson can watch the kids. I'm also finishing my bachelor's degree online." "Income?" "We get by. I receive some assistance, but I work hard to provide for my children." Throughout the inspection, Hoffman's expression remained unchanged. She photographed everything: the clean counters, the organized toy bins, the children's schoolwork displayed proudly on the wall. But her camera seemed focused on finding flaws that weren't there. When they returned to the living room, Emma was helping Tyler zip up his jacket for preschool. The interaction was gentle, patient, an older sister who clearly adored her little brother. "Emma, can you tell me about living here with your mom?" Hoffman asked, kneeling down to the child's level. Emma looked confused. "It's good. Mommy makes us pancakes on Tuesdays and reads us stories every night. She helps me with math when it's hard." "Does Mommy ever get angry?" "Sometimes when Tyler draws on the walls," Emma said honestly. "But she doesn't yell, she just makes him help clean it up." Tyler, overhearing his name, wandered over with his dinosaur still clutched in his small fist. "This is Rex," he announced proudly to Hoffman. "He's a vegetarian dinosaur. Mommy taught me that word." The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Hoffman asked about bedtimes, meals, discipline, school attendance, medical care. Every answer painted the picture of a devoted single mother doing her best to raise two healthy, happy children. But something in Hoffman's demeanor suggested she wasn't hearing what she wanted to hear. Rebecca walked the children to school that morning with a knot in her stomach. Emma chattered about the upcoming school play while Tyler practiced his dinosaur roars, but Rebecca's mind was elsewhere. Why would someone report her to CPS? She'd been a model parent, involved in Emma's school, never missed Tyler's doctor appointments, and maintained a clean and safe home despite their modest means. That afternoon, while Tyler napped and she worked on her college assignments, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The inspection had gone well, too well for Hoffman's apparent expectations. The woman had seemed almost disappointed by the orderly home and well-cared-for children. 3 days later, Rebecca's phone rang. It was her caseworker from the state assistance program. "Rebecca, I'm calling about your CPS case. There's been a report filed, and I wanted to give you a heads up before you receive official notice." "A report about what? The inspection went fine. She saw that my kids are happy and healthy." There was a pause. "That's not what the report says, Rebecca. According to Diana Hoffman's documentation, she found evidence of neglect, an unsafe living environment, and concerns about your fitness as a parent." Rebecca's hands began to shake. "That's impossible. She was here for over an hour. She saw everything. My house was clean, the kids were dressed and ready for school, the refrigerator was full." The report states otherwise. It mentions dirty conditions, inadequate food supplies, and behavioral concerns with both children. There's going to be a hearing scheduled. After hanging up, Rebecca sat in stunned silence. How could someone lie so blatantly about what they'd witnessed with their own eyes? The children she'd worked so hard to provide for, the home she'd maintained despite financial struggles, the love and stability she'd created for her family, none of it seemed to matter against whatever Hoffman had written in her report. What Rebecca didn't know was that Diana Hoffman had a pattern. Over the past 2 years, she'd removed 17 children from their homes, based on reports that painted pictures of neglect and abuse. She'd built a reputation as a thorough investigator who wasn't afraid to make difficult decisions to protect children. But she'd also built something else, a side business that thrived on family separation. Each removal came with overtime pay, court appearances, and consulting fees. The more cases she handled, the more indispensable she became to the system. And if the evidence didn't support removal, well, evidence could be adjusted. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The Martinez family was about to become her 18th case, based entirely on a fabricated report that bore no resemblance to what her own body camera had recorded that Tuesday morning. Rebecca had 48 hours before the emergency hearing that could tear her family apart. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday afternoon in courtroom 3B of the Riverside County Family Court. Rebecca sat in the cramped waiting area, her court-appointed attorney, Michael Chen, reviewing documents beside her. Chen was young, overworked, and handling 12 cases that day alone. He'd spent exactly 15 minutes reviewing Rebecca's file. "The allegations are serious," he said, without looking up. "Environmental neglect, inadequate supervision, failure to provide basic necessities. Hoffman's report is very detailed." "But none of it's true. She saw my home. She met my children." Chen finally glanced at her. "Mrs. Martinez, I've been doing this for 5 years. CPS workers don't file false reports. They're trained professionals." Across the hallway, Diana Hoffman sat with the county prosecutor, Sarah Whitmore. They were laughing about something, sharing coffee from expensive-looking travel mugs. Hoffman's report folder was thick, official-looking, stamped with various seals and signatures. "Your Honor," Whitmore began when they were called before Judge Patricia Sinclair, "the state has grave concerns about the welfare of Emma and Tyler Martinez. Our investigator, Ms. Hoffman, conducted a thorough home inspection and found conditions that warrant immediate removal." Judge Sinclair was in her 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been hearing family cases for over 2 decades and had seen every type of neglect imaginable. Her reputation was built on erring on the side of caution when it came to children's safety. Hoffman took the witness stand with confidence. She'd done this dozens of times before. Upon arrival at 347 Maple Street on Tuesday morning, I found the residence in a state of significant disarray, she testified, reading from her meticulously crafted report. The kitchen contained dirty dishes stacked in the sink, food remnants on the counters, and a refrigerator that was nearly empty except for expired milk and wilted vegetables. Rebecca's attorney scribbled notes but didn't object. This was standard procedure. The state presents its case first. The children appeared malnourished and were wearing soiled clothing. The 7-year-old, Emma, seemed withdrawn and fearful when questioned about her home life. The 4-year-old, Tyler, displayed behavioral issues consistent with neglect trauma. Each lie built upon the previous one, creating a narrative of a home in crisis. Hoffman described peeling paint, unsafe conditions, educational materials that were nowhere to be found, and a mother who seemed disinterested in her children's welfare. In my professional opinion, based on 15 years of experience, these children are at immediate risk if they remain in this environment. Rebecca watched in horror as her life was systematically dismantled by someone who had spent less than 2 hours in her home. The woman describing squalor and neglect bore no resemblance to the investigator who had photographed clean bedrooms and well-organized toys. When Chen cross-examined Hoffman, his questions were perfunctory. He asked about her training, her experience, and standard protocols. He never challenged the substance of her claims. "No further questions, Your Honor." Rebecca wanted to scream. Her attorney had barely tried to defend her. The prosecutor called her final witness, Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who had never met Emma or Tyler but was prepared to testify about the long-term effects of neglect based solely on Hoffman's report. Children living in the conditions described often exhibit delayed development, trust issues, and behavioral problems that can persist into adulthood, Foster explained. Early intervention through removal is often the kindest option. When it was Rebecca's turn to testify, she felt like she was drowning. Every question seemed designed to trap her. "Mrs. Martinez, Miss Hoffman reports finding very little food in your home. How do you explain that?" "That's not true. My refrigerator was full. I'd just gone grocery shopping the day before. There were fresh fruits, vegetables, sandwich meat for the kids' lunches." Yet the investigator photographed nearly empty shelves. "I don't know what photographs she's referring to. She took pictures of everything, including my well-stocked pantry." Judge Sinclair made notes, but her expression remained neutral. In her experience, parents in these situations often denied obvious problems. "Your employment is part-time and irregular, correct?" "I teach adult education classes at the community college 3 evenings a week. I'm also completing my bachelor's degree. I work hard to improve our situation." "But your income is below the poverty line." "Yes, but we manage. The children are never without food, clothing, or medical care. They're both doing well in school. Emma just won the spelling bee in her class." The questioning continued for another hour. Rebecca felt like every answer she gave was somehow twisted into evidence against her. When Chen asked about character witnesses, she mentioned Mrs. Patterson, her neighbor who helped with childcare, and Miss Rodriguez, Emma's teacher. "Your Honor, we didn't have time to prepare character witnesses," Chen said apologetically, "but I'm sure they would speak positively about Mrs. Martinez." Judge Sinclair had heard enough. Given the serious nature of the allegations and the detailed report from an experienced CPS investigator, I'm ordering temporary removal of both children pending further investigation. They'll be placed in emergency foster care while the department conducts additional assessments. Rebecca's world collapsed. The bailiff was already approaching as she stood on shaking legs. "Your Honor, please, my children need me. This report is false. Everything she said is a lie." "Mrs. Martinez, I understand this is difficult, but the court must prioritize the children's safety. You'll have opportunities to contest these findings through the proper legal channels." Within an hour, Rebecca was standing in her empty house. Emma and Tyler had been picked up from school and delivered to separate foster homes. The system was overwhelmed, and siblings couldn't always be placed together. Emma had cried and clung to her mother during the brief, supervised goodbye. Tyler hadn't understood why Mommy couldn't come with them. That night, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence of Hoffman's lies. The refrigerator still hummed with fresh groceries. The children's clean clothes hung in their closets. Their homework assignments were still spread on the dining room table, where Emma had been working on math problems just that morning. She called everyone she could think of: the public defender's office, legal aid organizations, child advocacy groups. Most were closed for the weekend. The few who answered explained that overturning a removal order was extremely difficult, especially when the initial report was so detailed. The system is designed to err on the side of caution, one paralegal explained. Even if there are inconsistencies in the report, judges rarely risk sending children back to potentially dangerous situations. On Sunday evening, Rebecca's phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson from next door. "Rebecca, honey, I hope you don't mind, but I was so worried about what happened. I called that CPS woman's office and left a message. I told them I've been watching your children for 2 years, and they're the sweetest, most well-cared-for kids I've ever seen." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I appreciate that." "There's something else. My grandson works in IT for the county. He mentioned something about body cameras that all the CPS workers wear now, for legal protection, he said. If that woman was really in your house and saw what I see every day, wouldn't that camera show the truth?" For the first time since Tuesday morning, Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Body cameras. If Hoffman had been recording during her visit, there would be footage of the clean house, the well-stocked refrigerator, the happy children getting ready for school. The truth was out there, recorded and stored somewhere in the county's digital files. She just had to figure out how to access it before the system buried her family forever. Monday morning, Rebecca made a phone call that would change everything. She contacted the law offices of Jennifer Walsh, an attorney who specialized in fighting wrongful CPS removals. Walsh had a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch, and she had a particular interest in exposing corruption within the system. "Mrs. Martinez," Walsh said after hearing the basics of her case, "body camera footage is considered public record once it's used in legal proceedings. We have the right to request it during discovery. If what you're telling me is true, that footage will tell a very different story than Mrs. Hoffman's report." But getting access to the footage wouldn't be simple. The county would likely fight the request, claiming privacy concerns or technical difficulties. It could take weeks or months of legal maneuvering. And every day that passed was another day her children spent in foster care, wondering why their mother had abandoned them. Rebecca had no way of knowing that Diana Hoffman was, at that very moment, sitting in her supervisor's office discussing the Martinez case with growing unease. The body camera footage had been automatically uploaded to the county's servers, and a routine audit had flagged some inconsistencies between the visual record and the written report. The truth was about to surface, but the question was whether it would come to light in time to save Rebecca's family. Jennifer Walsh's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in downtown Sacramento. Unlike the sterile government buildings Rebecca had become familiar with, Walsh's workspace felt warm and lived in. Family photos lined her desk, not her own family, but pictures sent by grateful clients whose children had been returned home. "I've been fighting these cases for 12 years, Walsh explained during their first meeting. "Started after my own sister lost her kids to a vindictive caseworker. The system is supposed to protect children, but sometimes it becomes the very thing families need protection from." Walsh pulled out a thick file folder. "I've been researching Diana Hoffman since you called. She's had 17 removals in the past 2 years. That's unusually high, even for someone handling difficult cases." Rebecca leaned forward. 17 families? 17 successful removals that led to long-term placement or termination of parental rights. But here's what's interesting. I found 3 other families who had initial investigations by Hoffman that didn't result in removal. In each case, the parents hired private attorneys who demanded body camera footage. What happened to those cases? They were quietly dropped. No explanation, no follow-up. The families got their children back, but they had to sign confidentiality agreements as part of the settlement. Walsh opened her laptop and showed Rebecca a spreadsheet. Look at the timeline. Hoffman's removal rate spiked dramatically 18 months ago, right around the time the county implemented mandatory body cameras for all field workers. So she knew she was being recorded during every investigation? Exactly, which makes her falsified reports even more puzzling. Unless, Walsh paused, studying the data more carefully, unless she found a way to manipulate the footage, or she's gambling that families won't have the resources to fight for access to it. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. Most of the families she targets are low income, aren't they? Single mothers, immigrant families, people receiving government assistance. Families who can't afford attorneys like me, who don't know their rights, who don't have the time or knowledge to navigate the system. While Walsh worked on the legal strategy to obtain the body camera footage, Rebecca faced a different battle. The supervised visits with Emma and Tyler were scheduled for 2 hours every Wednesday afternoon at the County Social Services Building. The sterile conference room, with its industrial carpet and fluorescent lighting, felt nothing like home. Emma had lost weight in just 2 weeks. The vibrant 7-year-old who used to chatter constantly about school and friends now sat quietly, coloring with worn crayons. Tyler, placed with a different foster family across town, seemed confused and angry. "When are we coming home, Mommy?" Emma asked during their third visit. "I'm working very hard to bring you home soon, baby. The lawyers are helping me fix the mistakes that were made." The foster mom is nice, but she doesn't make Tuesday pancakes, and she doesn't know that I like my sandwich cut in triangles, not squares. Rebecca bit back tears. "I know, sweetheart. I miss our Tuesday pancakes too." Tyler was harder to comfort. At 4 years old, he didn't understand why his routine had been shattered. He'd started having nightmares and refused to eat vegetables, something that had never been an issue at home. "Rex is at home," he said sadly, referring to his beloved stuffed dinosaur. "Can you bring Rex?" I asked, but they said no toys from home right now. But Rex is safe. He's waiting for you in your room. The supervised visits were torture for Rebecca. She could see her children slipping away, adapting to new environments, new rules, new people. Each week, Emma asked fewer questions about coming home. Tyler clung to her less desperately when their time was up. Meanwhile, the bureaucratic wheels turned slowly. Walsh filed motion after motion, requesting the body camera footage, demanding discovery, challenging the removal order. Each filing generated a response from the county attorney's office, citing privacy concerns, technical difficulties, and ongoing investigations. "They're stalling," Walsh explained after their fourth court appearance. "The longer the children remain in care, the more the system views reunification as disruptive to their stability." But Walsh had been building her case in other ways. She'd interviewed Mrs. Patterson, who provided a detailed sworn statement about Rebecca's parenting over the past 2 years. Emma's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, submitted records showing Emma's excellent attendance, academic performance, and emotional stability prior to the removal. "I taught Emma for the entire school year," Rodriguez stated in her affidavit. "She was always clean, well-dressed, and came to school with healthy lunches packed with love notes from her mother. She talked constantly about family activities, museum visits, library trips, nature walks. This is not a child from a neglectful home." Dr. Patricia Mills, Tyler's pediatrician, provided medical records showing regular checkups, up-to-date vaccinations, and a child who was thriving developmentally. "Rebecca Martinez is one of the most attentive parents in my practice," Mills wrote. "She asks thoughtful questions, follows through on recommendations, and clearly prioritizes her children's health and well-being." Walsh also discovered something troubling about Diana Hoffman's background. Prior to her current position, Hoffman had worked for a private company that contracted with the state to provide foster care services. She'd left that position abruptly after an internal investigation into placement practices. It's all connected, Walsh explained to Rebecca. The private foster care industry is a multi-billion-dollar business. Every child removed generates revenue for foster families, for case management services, for court-appointed advocates. Hoffman's former employer happens to be the same company that's been getting most of the emergency placements from her cases. The web of corruption was deeper than Rebecca had imagined, but proving it would require the one piece of evidence the county seemed determined to keep hidden: the body camera footage from that Tuesday morning. 6 weeks after the removal, Walsh finally received word that a court date had been set to argue the motion for release of the body camera footage. Judge Morrison, different from the judge who had ordered the initial removal, would hear arguments from both sides. "This is our shot," Walsh told Rebecca. "If we can get that footage in front of a judge, your case changes completely." The night before the hearing, Rebecca sat in Emma's bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of her children's lives. Emma's spelling bee trophy on the dresser. Tyler's dinosaur drawings are still hanging on the wall. The reading chart where she'd been tracking their progress through picture books. Her phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson. "Rebecca, dear, I've been thinking about something. That morning when the CPS lady came to your house, I was watering my plants on the back porch. I could see into your kitchen window." "What did you see?" "You were making pancakes. The children were eating breakfast at the table, all dressed for school. Emma was helping Tyler with his jacket. It looked like any normal Tuesday morning in a happy home." "Would you be willing to testify to that?" "Of course, honey, but there's something else. My grandson, the one who works in IT for the county, he mentioned that they've been having problems with their video storage system. Something about files getting corrupted or going missing." Rebecca's heart sank. Missing? He didn't know the details, but apparently there's been an internal investigation. Some footage from various departments has disappeared from the servers. After hanging up, Rebecca stared at the ceiling of Tyler's room, fear gnawing at her chest. What if the footage had been destroyed? What if Hoffman had found a way to eliminate the evidence of her lies? Tomorrow's hearing might be her last chance to prove her innocence, and the only evidence that could clear her name might no longer exist. But Rebecca didn't know that at that very moment, across town, in a secure server room, a digital copy of Diana Hoffman's body camera footage from Tuesday morning was being quietly downloaded by someone with authorized access. Someone who had been watching the Martinez case with growing concern. Someone who had finally decided that the truth needed to come to light no matter the consequences to their own career. The footage was being copied to an encrypted drive, along with documentation showing exactly when it had been scheduled for deletion from the county servers. By morning, Jennifer Walsh would have the evidence she needed to expose not just Diana Hoffman's lies, but the entire system that had protected her for so long. The truth was finally about to surface, but Rebecca would have to endure one more night of uncertainty, one more sleepless evening wondering if she would ever hold her children again. The manila envelope appeared on Jennifer Walsh's desk at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before the crucial hearing. No return address, no delivery signature, just her name typed on a label and the words, "Time-sensitive, Martinez case," written in red ink. Inside was an encrypted USB drive and a single sheet of paper. This footage was scheduled for deletion at midnight. The timestamp logs are included. Someone needed to see the truth. A friend of justice. Walsh plugged the drive into her secure laptop, her hands trembling slightly as the files loaded. What she saw made her gasp audibly. The body camera footage began at 8:47 a.m. on Tuesday, October 15th, showing Diana Hoffman's arrival at 347 Maple Street. The timestamp in the corner was crystal clear, and the audio quality was perfect. For the next hour and 23 minutes, the camera recorded everything Hoffman saw and heard during her investigation. The first frames showed Rebecca opening the door, flour on her hands, surprise on her face. In the background, the sounds of children laughing drifted from the kitchen. The camera captured Emma's neat ponytail, Tyler's dinosaur shirt, the smell of vanilla pancakes filling the air. As Hoffman moved through the house, the footage contradicted every single claim in her written report. The kitchen was spotless, with breakfast prepared and served on colorful children's plates. The refrigerator, when opened, revealed shelves packed with fresh groceries, milk with a sell-by date 2 weeks in the future, crisp vegetables, sandwich meat, yogurt cups, and a drawer full of fresh fruit. The children's bedrooms were clean and organized. Emma's homework was spread neatly on her desk, completed and ready for school. Tyler's toys were arranged in bins, his bed made with military precision for a 4-year-old. But most damning was the audio. Hoffman's questions to the children and Rebecca's responses were recorded in full. Emma's bright voice explaining her mother's bedtime stories, Tyler's enthusiastic introduction of his vegetarian dinosaur, Rebecca's patient answers about her work schedule and childcare arrangements. At no point did either child seem withdrawn, fearful, or neglected. At no point did Hoffman observe dirty conditions, inadequate food, or unsafe environments. The contrast between the visual evidence and her written report wasn't just misleading, it was perjury. Walsh spent the next hour creating timestamps and notes, preparing exhibits that would demolish Hoffman's credibility. But as she worked, she noticed something else troubling in the footage. Several times, Hoffman had deliberately positioned herself to photograph angles that could be misinterpreted. A corner of the bathroom where Tyler's bath toys were piled up was shot to look like clutter. The breakfast dishes in the sink were photographed, but not the clean counters surrounding them. More disturbing were Hoffman's off-camera comments, picked up by the body microphone when she thought no one was listening. During a brief moment when Rebecca was getting the children's school bags, Hoffman could be heard muttering, "This one's going to be tricky. Too clean, too organized. I need a different angle." At 8:15 a.m., Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. The courtroom was nearly empty, except for Rebecca, Walsh, the county prosecutor David Kim, and Diana Hoffman sitting in the witness section. Rebecca's stomach churned as she looked at the woman who had destroyed her family with lies. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Kim began, "the county objects to the release of body camera footage on the grounds of privacy protection and ongoing investigation protocols. The written report provides all necessary information for these proceedings." Walsh stood, her laptop bag containing the encrypted drive feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. "Your Honor, my client has the right to confront the evidence against her. The body camera footage is the only objective record of what actually occurred during the home inspection. Furthermore," Walsh continued, "we have reason to believe there are significant discrepancies between the written report and the visual evidence that could only be resolved by reviewing the footage." Judge Morrison, a veteran of family court, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, considered both arguments. "Mr. Kim, is there a legitimate privacy concern given that this footage was taken during an official investigation of a home where children were allegedly at risk?" "Your Honor, the county has policies in place to protect the privacy of families under investigation." "Families like mine who've been torn apart by false allegations?" Rebecca whispered loudly enough for the judge to hear. "Mrs. Martinez," Judge Morrison said firmly but not unkindly, "you'll have your opportunity to speak." Walsh approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess. We've received evidence this morning that I believe will resolve this matter definitively." During the 15-minute break, Walsh showed Rebecca portions of the footage on her laptop. Rebecca watched herself making pancakes, watched Emma helping Tyler with his jacket, watched Hoffman photographing the well-stocked refrigerator, which she would later claim was nearly empty. "They can't deny this," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This proves everything." When court reconvened, Walsh made her bombshell announcement. "Your Honor, we no longer need to request body camera footage from the county. We have obtained a complete copy of the recording from the Martinez home inspection." Prosecutor Kim shot to his feet. "Objection! We haven't authenticated any such footage. The chain of custody?" "Your Honor," Walsh interrupted, "this footage contains embedded metadata, timestamps, and digital signatures that prove its authenticity. I'm prepared to have it examined by the court's technical experts if necessary." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Miss Walsh, how did you obtain this footage?" "It was provided by someone within the system who was concerned about potential misconduct. The metadata shows it was scheduled for deletion from county servers at midnight last night." The courtroom fell silent. Even Kim seemed stunned by the implication that evidence was being destroyed. "Your Honor," Walsh continued, I request permission to play selected portions of this footage to demonstrate the discrepancies between what Miss Hoffman observed and what she reported. Judge Morrison considered carefully. Given the serious nature of these allegations and the claim that evidence was nearly destroyed, I'll allow a limited viewing. Set up your equipment, Miss Walsh. The next 20 minutes changed everything. As the footage played on Walsh's laptop connected to the courtroom's display system, Judge Morrison's expression grew increasingly grave. The prosecutor's objections grew weaker and less frequent. Diana Hoffman sat frozen in her chair, watching her career and reputation crumble in real time. The footage showed Emma's bedroom, clean and organized, while Walsh read from Hoffman's report claiming unsafe sleeping conditions and inadequate supervision. It showed the well-stocked refrigerator, while Walsh quoted the report's claim of insufficient food supplies and expired items. Most powerful was the audio of the children themselves, happy, articulate, well-adjusted kids talking about their loving mother and their normal family routines. When the footage ended, Judge Morrison removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture everyone in the courtroom recognized as his way of processing shocking information. "Miss Hoffman," he said quietly, "would you like to explain to this court how your written report describes a home investigation that bears no resemblance whatsoever to what your own body camera recorded?" Hoffman's attorney, who had been hastily called when the footage began playing, requested a brief consultation with his client. But the damage was irreversible. The evidence of perjury was overwhelming and undeniable. "Your Honor," Kim said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the county requests time to conduct an internal investigation into these discrepancies." "Mr. Kim, I'm not interested in internal investigations. I'm interested in 2 children who were removed from their home based on what appears to be completely fabricated evidence." Judge Morrison turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Martinez, I want to apologize on behalf of this court and this system. What happened to your family should never happen to any family." "No one is ever taking you away from me again," Rebecca promised, though she knew the trauma of separation would take time to heal. The house on Maple Street felt different when they walked through the front door. Mrs. Patterson had been watering the plants and collecting the mail, but 7 weeks of emptiness had settled into the rooms like dust. Emma immediately ran to her bedroom to check that everything was still there: her books, her art supplies, her collection of smooth stones from their nature walks. Tyler found Rex exactly where he'd left him and spent the next hour reintroducing his stuffed dinosaur to every corner of the house, as if the toy needed to remember their home, too. That evening, Rebecca kept her promise and made pancakes for dinner instead of breakfast, a celebration meal that Emma had requested during their drive home. As they sat around their familiar kitchen table, using the animal-shaped plates that had been photographed as evidence of a loving home, Rebecca felt the first real peace she'd known in nearly 2 months. But their story was far from over. Within 48 hours of the court hearing, the local news had picked up the story. Body camera footage exposes CPS corruption ran as the lead story on 3 different television stations. The Sacramento Bee newspaper requested an interview with Rebecca and Jennifer Walsh, wanting to explore the broader implications of the case. "This isn't an isolated incident," Walsh explained to reporter Marcus Thompson during their interview. "Diana Hoffman handled over 60 cases in the past 3 years. We've already been contacted by 12 other families who believe they were victims of similar false reports." The newspaper investigation that followed would eventually reveal the scope of Hoffman's corruption. Financial records showed she had received bonuses and overtime pay directly tied to the number of removals she completed. Her former employer, Sunrise Family Services, had indeed received the majority of emergency placements from her cases, a relationship that generated millions in state contracts. But perhaps most damning was the discovery of a private email account where Hoffman had corresponded with supervisors at placement agencies discussing difficult families who might require creative documentation to ensure child safety. The FBI opened a federal investigation into corruption within the county's child protection system. Agent Sarah Rodriguez, who specialized in public corruption cases, found evidence of a network that extended far beyond one rogue caseworker. What we uncovered was a systematic scheme to inflate removal numbers in order to increase federal funding and private contracts. Agent Rodriguez would later testify before a congressional subcommittee. Vulnerable families were specifically targeted because they lacked the resources to fight back effectively. Rebecca found herself at the center of a media storm she hadn't asked for. Reporters called daily, wanting interviews about her experience. Child advocacy groups asked her to speak at conferences. Legal organizations requested her testimony for proposed legislation. But her focus remained on healing her family. Emma had started having nightmares about social workers coming to take her away. Tyler had developed separation anxiety and cried whenever Rebecca left for work, even though Mrs. Patterson was there to watch him. Both children needed therapy to process the trauma of their removal and placement in foster care. Dr. Michelle Foster, a child psychologist unrelated to the expert who had testified against Rebecca, worked with the family to rebuild their sense of security. Children who experience wrongful removal often struggle with trust issues long after they're returned home, she explained. The system that's supposed to protect them became the source of their trauma. The therapy sessions revealed the depth of damage that had been done in just 7 weeks. Emma had been told by well-meaning foster parents that her mother was sick and needed to get better before she could come home. Tyler had been placed with a family that spoke primarily Spanish, creating additional confusion and isolation for a child who was already struggling to understand why his life had been turned upside down. 6 months after their reunion, Rebecca received a call from Jennifer Walsh with news that would provide some measure of justice. Diana Hoffman had been arrested on federal charges of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and perjury. Her trial would expose the full extent of her corruption and lead to prison time that would ensure she never worked in child protection again. More importantly for Rebecca, the civil lawsuit Walsh had filed on behalf of the Martinez family was moving forward. The county had already agreed to a substantial settlement, acknowledging their liability in the wrongful removal. But for Rebecca, the money was less important than the policy changes being implemented to prevent future cases like hers. Body camera footage would now be automatically preserved for a minimum of 5 years and could only be deleted with judicial oversight. All removal reports would require secondary review by supervisors before being filed. And perhaps most significantly, families would have the right to immediate access to any audio or visual recordings made during investigations. "Your case changed everything," Walsh told Rebecca during one of their final meetings. "The Martinez precedent is already being cited in courts across the country." As Rebecca watched her children playing in their backyard that summer, she reflected on how much their lives had changed. Emma was back to her outgoing, confident self, though she now insisted on having her mother's phone number memorized just in case. Tyler still carried Rex everywhere, but his nightmares had finally stopped. The community had rallied around them in ways Rebecca never expected. Mrs. Patterson had organized a neighborhood watch program to support families dealing with CPS investigations. Emma's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had started a resource group for parents navigating the child protection welfare system. Even the grocery store clerk who had seen Emma and Tyler grow up made a point of checking on the family regularly. But perhaps the most meaningful support came from other families who had survived similar ordeals. Rebecca received letters from mothers in Texas, Ohio, and Florida who had fought false allegations and won. She heard from fathers who had been vindicated after months of separation from their children. Each story reinforced that their experience, while traumatic, had helped expose a problem that needed urgent attention. Rebecca began volunteering with a new organization called Truth in Child Protection, helping other families understand their rights and navigate the legal system. She spoke at training sessions for new social workers, emphasizing the devastating impact of false reports on innocent families. "The system is supposed to protect children," she would tell these audiences, "but when that protection becomes persecution based on lies, the system itself becomes the threat to family stability." 2 years after that Tuesday morning when Diana Hoffman first knocked on her door, Rebecca watched Emma win another spelling bee and Tyler start kindergarten with confidence and enthusiasm. Their family had not only survived the system's failures, but had helped change it for the better. The body camera footage that had nearly been destroyed became the evidence that exposed corruption, vindicated an innocent family, and created new protections for vulnerable parents everywhere. Sometimes, Rebecca reflected, the truth really does set you free, but only if you're brave enough to fight for it and fortunate enough to find allies willing to help you prove it. The Martinez family's ordeal was over, but their impact on child protection reform was just beginning. Across the country, other families were now armed with the knowledge, legal precedents, and policy changes that Rebecca's fight had made possible. Diana Hoffman's reign of terror had ended, but more importantly, the system itself was slowly being reformed to ensure that truth, not lies, would determine a family's fate. 3 years after Diana Hoffman's conviction, Rebecca Martinez stood before a packed auditorium at the National Child Welfare Conference in Washington, D.C. The audience of social workers, attorneys, and policymakers had come to hear from the woman whose case had sparked nationwide reform in child protection services. But this wasn't the same Rebecca who had once trembled in a courtroom fighting for her children's return. This Rebecca spoke with the confidence of someone who had transformed personal trauma into systemic change. When I opened my door that Tuesday morning, I thought I was facing one corrupt caseworker, she began. What we discovered was an entire network designed to profit from family separation. The federal investigation that had started with Diana Hoffman's arrest had uncovered what prosecutors called the largest child welfare fraud scheme in U.S. history. Over 47 people across 6 states had been indicted, including Hoffman's former supervisor, 3 judges who had fast-tracked removal orders, and the CEO of Sunrise Family Services. The conspiracy had generated over $200 million in fraudulent federal funding over 8 years. Families had been targeted based on their vulnerability: single mothers, immigrants, families receiving government assistance, people who were least likely to have the resources to fight back effectively. Agent Sarah Rodriguez, now heading the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, had testified before Congress about the scope of the scheme. The Martinez case was the thread that unraveled an entire tapestry of corruption, she explained. Without that body camera footage and Jennifer Walsh's determination to pursue the truth, this network might have continued operating indefinitely. The ripple effects extended far beyond criminal convictions. The class action lawsuit that had grown from Rebecca's individual case had resulted in an $850 million settlement for affected families. More than 400 children had been returned to homes they should never have been removed from. Dozens of adoptions based on fraudulent removals had been reversed, reuniting families that had been permanently separated by lies. But the most significant changes were happening at the policy level. The Martinez Act, federal legislation named after Rebecca's case, had created new oversight mechanisms for child protection agencies nationwide. Every state was now required to implement body camera programs for field workers, establish independent review boards for removal decisions, and provide free legal representation for families facing child welfare proceedings. Dr. Patricia Mills, Tyler's former pediatrician, who had become a vocal advocate for reform, now served on the National Child Protection Oversight Board. Rebecca's case showed us that good intentions aren't enough, she explained to the conference audience. We need systems that can't be manipulated by individuals with ulterior motives. The personal cost of the fight had been enormous for the Martinez family. Emma, now 10 years old, had struggled with anxiety throughout elementary school. The confident 7-year-old who had once spelling bees had become withdrawn and fearful of authority figures. It had taken 2 years of therapy and Rebecca's constant reassurance before Emma began to trust that her family was truly safe. Tyler, now 7, had adapted better but carried his own scars. He still slept with Rex, the stuffed dinosaur that had waited for him during those 7 weeks in foster care. He had vivid memories of the confusion and fear he'd experienced as a 4-year-old, unable to understand why his mother had suddenly disappeared from his life. The children who are wrongfully removed are victims twice, explained Dr. Michelle Foster, who had continued working with the family. First by the false allegations, then by a system that traumatizes them in the name of protection. But the Martinez children had also witnessed their mother's transformation into a powerful advocate for justice. Emma often accompanied Rebecca to speaking events, listening to stories from other families who had survived similar ordeals. Tyler had drawn pictures of good social workers and bad social workers, his 7-year-old mind processing the complexity of a system that was supposed to help but had instead caused harm. The financial settlement had allowed Rebecca to complete her bachelor's degree and eventually pursue a master's in social work. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had been falsely accused of child neglect was now training to work within the system that had failed her family. "I want to be the social worker I needed when Diana Hoffman knocked on my door," Rebecca explained to her graduate school advisor. "Someone who looks for truth instead of looking for ways to justify predetermined conclusions." Her internship placement was with the newly reformed Sacramento County Child Protection Services, now operating under federal oversight as part of the settlement agreement. The office where Diana Hoffman had once worked had been completely restructured, with new leadership, mandatory training programs, and robust accountability measures. Rebecca's supervisor, Maria Santos, was a veteran social worker who had blown the whistle on the corruption scheme after recognizing patterns in Hoffman's cases. "Rebecca brings a unique perspective," Santos explained. "She understands both the importance of child protection and the devastating impact of getting it wrong." The work wasn't easy. Rebecca found herself investigating legitimate cases of abuse and neglect, situations where children genuinely needed protection. The balance between child safety and family preservation was delicate, requiring skills that couldn't be learned from textbooks. But she also encountered cases that reminded her of her own experience: families struggling with poverty, single mothers overwhelmed by circumstances, situations that called for support rather than separation. In these cases, Rebecca became a fierce advocate for services and assistance rather than removal. One case particularly resonated with her. Lisa Chen, a young mother whose husband had recently died in a car accident, was struggling to manage her grief while caring for 2 young children. A neighbor had reported concerns about the children's welfare after seeing them playing unsupervised in their yard. The old system might have focused on the risk factors: single mother, recent trauma, apparent lack of supervision. Rebecca saw a family in crisis that needed help, not punishment. "What kind of support do you need to keep your family together?" Rebecca asked during her first visit, sitting at Lisa's kitchen table while the children played nearby. The conversation led to connections with grief counseling, childcare assistance, and a network of other widowed parents who could provide emotional support. 6 months later, Lisa was thriving as a single mother, and her children were flourishing with the stability of remaining in their home. "That's how the system is supposed to work," Rebecca reflected. "We should be building families up, not tearing them down." Jennifer Walsh, now running a nonprofit legal clinic focused on child welfare cases, often worked with Rebecca on complex situations. Their partnership had evolved from attorney-client to colleagues united in reforming a broken system. "Rebecca has an instinct for recognizing when something doesn't feel right," Walsh observed. "She knows what it looks like when a family is genuinely struggling versus when they're being targeted unfairly." The national attention had also brought unexpected connections. Rebecca received regular correspondence from families around the world facing similar challenges with child protection systems. Parents in the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada reached out for advice and support, sharing stories that revealed the international scope of system abuse. An organization called Global Families First had invited Rebecca to speak at conferences in London and Sydney, sharing the lessons learned from the Martinez case with child welfare professionals worldwide. The body camera requirements and independent oversight mechanisms pioneered in the United States were being adapted by other countries seeking to prevent similar corruption. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The children who had been wrongfully removed during Diana Hoffman's reign of terror, now older and able to understand what had happened to them, began reaching out to thank Rebecca for her fight. Marcus Williams, who had been 5 years old when he was removed from his grandmother's care based on Hoffman's false report, was now 11 and thriving back home. "My grandma says you're the reason I got to come home," he wrote in a carefully crafted letter. Thank you for being brave. These letters reminded Rebecca why the fight had been worth it. Every family reunited, every child returned home, every corrupt official held accountable represented a victory not just for justice, but for the fundamental principle that families shouldn't be destroyed by lies. As Rebecca concluded her speech at the national conference, she looked out at an audience that represented the future of child protection. Social workers, attorneys, and advocates who were committed to learning from the failures of the past. "The system failed my family, but it also gave us the tools to fight back," she said. "Body cameras, legal representation, independent oversight, these aren't obstacles to child protection. They're essential safeguards that ensure we're protecting children by supporting families, not destroying them." The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, but for Rebecca, the real measure of success wasn't the applause. It was the knowledge that somewhere, a social worker trained in the new protocols was knocking on a family's door with the intention of helping rather than harming. It was the understanding that body cameras were recording truth instead of enabling lies. It was the certainty that other families would never have to endure what the Martinez family had survived. Diana Hoffman was serving a 15-year federal sentence, but her legacy of corruption had been replaced by a new commitment to transparency, accountability, and truth in child protection. Rebecca Martinez had transformed from victim to victor, ensuring that her family's trauma would prevent countless others from experiencing the same injustice. 5 years after Diana Hoffman's first knock on her door, Rebecca Martinez stood in the kitchen of her new home, watching Emma practice her high school debate team arguments while Tyler worked on a science project about dinosaur extinction. The scene was remarkably similar to that Tuesday morning that had changed everything. A mother preparing breakfast while her children got ready for school, but everything was different now. The house itself was larger, purchased with part of the settlement money, but more importantly, it represented security in a way their previous home never could. This house had an advanced security system, not because Rebecca feared criminals, but because she'd learned that sometimes the greatest threats come wearing badges and carrying clipboards. Emma, now 13, had channeled her experience with the justice system into a passion for constitutional law. Her debate team arguments often focused on civil liberties and government accountability, delivered with the conviction of someone who had witnessed both the failure and eventual triumph of American justice. "The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches," she argued during a practice session. But what happens when the searchers themselves are unreasonable? When the system designed to protect becomes the system that destroys? Tyler, now 9, had maintained his love of dinosaurs, but had expanded his interests to include forensic science. His current project examined how paleontologists use evidence to reconstruct the truth about creatures that lived millions of years ago, a metaphor that wasn't lost on Rebecca, who had watched her son learn that truth-telling was one of the most important skills a person could develop. The morning routine had evolved to include new traditions. Every Tuesday, they still made pancakes, but now they also took a moment to remember families who were still fighting for reunification. Rebecca had created a small memorial corner in their dining room with photos and letters from families whose battles continued. At 8:47 a.m., the exact time Diana Hoffman had first arrived, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. "Supreme Court agreed to hear the Morrison case. The Martinez precedent is going national." The Morrison case represented the next frontier in child protection reform. James Morrison, a father in Michigan, had been falsely accused by a caseworker who had learned from Diana Hoffman's methods before her conviction. But this time, the body camera footage had been accidentally deleted before anyone could review it. Walsh had taken the case pro bono, arguing that the deliberate destruction of body camera evidence should result in automatic dismissal of child welfare proceedings. Lower courts had been split on the issue, but the Supreme Court's decision to hear the case meant that Rebecca's fight was about to influence constitutional law at the highest level. This could establish a constitutional right to body camera evidence in all child welfare cases, Walsh explained during their weekly phone call. "Your case started with one corrupt caseworker, but it's evolving into fundamental protections for all American families." Rebecca's work as a senior child protection specialist had evolved as well. She now led a specialized unit that investigated allegations of caseworker misconduct, working directly with the FBI when patterns of corruption emerged. Her team had uncovered 3 additional fraud schemes in other states, leading to the recovery of millions in fraudulent payments and the reunification of dozens of families. But the work that meant the most to her was training new social workers. Every month, Rebecca spoke to incoming staff about the importance of truth, evidence, and the devastating impact of false allegations. Remember, she would tell these young professionals, you hold the power to destroy or preserve families. That's not a responsibility to take lightly. One of her trainees, Amanda Rodriguez, had been particularly impacted by Rebecca's story. Rodriguez had joined Child Protection Services after her own sister had lost custody of her children to a corrupt caseworker in Texas, one of the officials later convicted as part of the federal investigation. Rebecca taught me that being a good social worker means being willing to admit when you're wrong, Rodriguez explained. It means looking for ways to keep families together instead of looking for reasons to tear them apart. The ripple effects of the Martinez case continue to spread in unexpected ways. Dr. Patricia Mills had used her position on the National Child Protection Oversight Board to establish new medical protocols for abuse investigations. Children could no longer be subjected to multiple examinations by different agencies, and all medical evidence had to be independently verified. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s, had become an unofficial neighborhood child advocate, teaching other community members how to recognize the signs of wrongful investigations and how to support families facing false allegations. After what I witnessed happen to Rebecca and those babies, she often said, I realized we all have a responsibility to watch out for each other. Emma's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had eventually left education to become a family advocate, working with Walsh's legal clinic to provide support services for families navigating the child welfare system. She often reflected on how Emma's case had opened her eyes to the vulnerabilities all families faced. The international impact had grown as well. Rebecca received a letter from the European Union announcing new directives for child protection services across member nations, based largely on reforms pioneered in the United States following the Martinez case. Your courage to fight back has literally changed the way child protection works around the world, wrote Dr. Helen Morrison, director of the EU's Child Welfare Initiative. Families in 27 countries now have stronger protections because of your refusal to accept injustice. But perhaps the most unexpected development came from Diana Hoffman herself. Now 3 years into her federal prison sentence, she had requested a meeting with Rebecca through her attorney. The meeting took place at the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California, with Jennifer Walsh present as Rebecca's advocate. Hoffman looked older, grayer, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of her crimes. I don't expect forgiveness, Hoffman began, her voice barely above a whisper. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did, not just to your family, but to all those families. Rebecca studied the woman who had nearly destroyed her life. What changed? Prison gives you time to think, to remember the faces of the children I separated from their parents. I told myself I was protecting them, but I was really just protecting my income, my reputation, my career. Hoffman had been participating in a prison rehabilitation program focused on accountability and victim impact. She had written letters to every family she had wrongfully targeted, though most had been returned unopened. I've been working with federal investigators to identify other corrupt networks, she continued. There are more cases like mine in other states. My testimony has helped convict 12 other officials so far. Rebecca felt no satisfaction in seeing her former tormentor reduced to this broken figure. There was only sadness for all the damage that had been done, and relief that it could never happen again. The children you separated from their families, they'll carry those scars forever, Rebecca said finally. But if your cooperation helps prevent it from happening to other families, maybe some good can come from all this destruction. As they prepared to leave, Hoffman made one final statement. That body camera footage, I thought no one would ever see it. I thought poor families didn't have the resources to fight back. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about everything else. The meeting had been emotionally draining, but it provided closure Rebecca hadn't realized she needed. Diana Hoffman was no longer the powerful figure who had terrorized her family. She was simply a person who had made terrible choices and was now facing the consequences. 6 months later, Rebecca received an invitation that represented the culmination of everything she had fought for. The White House was hosting a ceremony to honor child protection reform advocates, and Rebecca was being awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her role in exposing corruption and advancing family rights. The ceremony took place in the Rose Garden on a warm spring morning. Emma and Tyler sat in the front row, along with Jennifer Walsh, Mrs. Patterson, and dozens of other families whose lives had been changed by the reforms Rebecca's case had sparked. The president said during the presentation, "Rebecca Martinez represents the best of American values. When faced with injustice, she didn't accept it. She fought back, and her fight has made our entire nation stronger." As Rebecca accepted the medal, she thought about all the people who had made this moment possible. The mysterious friend of justice who had saved the body camera footage. Judge Morrison, who had been willing to hear the truth. Agent Rodriguez, who had pursued the investigation wherever it led. Jennifer Walsh, who had never stopped believing in justice. But mostly she thought about Emma and Tyler, who had endured separation and trauma so that other children wouldn't have to. They had paid the price for their mother's fight, and their resilience had made the victory possible. In her acceptance speech, Rebecca kept her comments brief. "This medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every family that has been torn apart by lies and every family that has been reunited by truth. It belongs to every social worker who chooses to protect families instead of persecuting them. And it belongs to every child who gets to stay home tonight because the system finally works the way it's supposed to." That evening, the Martinez family returned to their house on Elm Street, their safe haven, their sanctuary, their home. Emma worked on her latest debate about government accountability. Tyler built elaborate dinosaur habitats while explaining to Rex about extinction and survival. Rebecca prepared dinner, watching her children and marveling at how far they had all come. The nightmare that had begun with Diana Hoffman's knock on their door had been transformed into a nationwide awakening about the need for accountability in child protection. Hundreds of families had been reunited. Corrupt officials had been imprisoned. Policies had been reformed. Systems had been rebuilt. And in kitchens across America, mothers were making dinner for their children, secure in the knowledge that truth was stronger than lies, that justice was possible, and that sometimes one family's courage to fight back could change the world. The Martinez family's story was complete, but the legacy of their fight would continue protecting families for generations to come. Every body camera that recorded truth instead of enabling deception, every oversight board that held officials accountable, every family that stayed together because the system worked correctly, all of it traced back to that Tuesday morning when Rebecca Martinez decided she would not let lies destroy her family. The truth had indeed set them free, and in doing so, it had freed countless others as well. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.